California. These are redwoods. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about forest development, and then I'm going to move into talking about birds in forests, and then the Young Forest Initiative, and then I'll talk more about the Old Growth Forest Network. So this photo is to set the stage to talk about forest development, because you'll hear me talking about old growth forests and second growth forests and young forests. And sometimes that can be hard to picture the difference, but it's certainly easy to picture the difference here in this California forest, the old growth forest. And here is the person who took this photo, John Harvey, set this up looking not into an old growth forest, but into a second growth forest. So this is a place where they cut the old growth redwoods down. By the way, 95% of those old growth redwoods were cut down. And the forest is recovering here. It's growing back, but it's going to take many years for it to fully develop the structure of an old growth forest and the biodiversity of an old growth forest. So again, there's a second growth forest. And if you look in the ecology textbooks, you might see something like this, talking about succession in forest land. So we are very fortunate that we live on land that's natural state is going to be a forest if we leave it alone. So if we do something to that forest, if we cut it down, if we burn it down, if we push the trees over, but the soil is still intact, it will start to recover. This would be very early successional forest, and a young forest down here, it says 18 to 70 years old. And in this diagram, then it says the old forest is 70 to 100 years old, the oak hickory, where the deciduous trees have grown back up. But if you're familiar with not only the lifespan of trees, but the longevity of these forests, 70 to 100 years old is nothing. Those trees aren't even really fully mature yet. A lot of the trees in our forest can live many hundreds of years. Black gum can live 500 years. Some of the white oaks can live 350 years old. The maples can live close to 200 years old. So we don't always see the trees that old, but they can be that old. And the forest itself can be intact with this forest community growing for many thousands of years. So these diagrams only show a very small part of the picture. This is another diagram of the same sort of thing, forest development. This is stand initiation after that forest has been destroyed and it's growing back. The different symbols stand for different species. So in this phase, stem exclusion, we have all the trees that started growing back in, whether it's from seed or the roots. And now in stem exclusion, they're all trying to outcompete each other. And they're just going straight up for the sky. That's like that photo we saw of the California forest. And it can be very shady underneath these forests, not much in the way of undergrowth or herbaceous plant material because it's so shady. Sometimes these are called green deserts because they're not very biodiverse. But then initially, the shade-loving species will grow back in, and these could be herbaceous plants, or they could be shrubs, or they could be some trees that only will grow in the shade, such as beech trees. And then finally, we get into the old growth phase where not only do you have the shade-loving trees come in, but now some of them have reached the canopy. And then we have some trees that have fallen over and died of old age, or in that stem exclusion, they don't all make it, right? Some of them got shaded out, some of them died from disease. And we have a very complex forest then in that phase. And it's this structure that is important for biodiversity and the birds we're going to look at. And you can tell I'm a teacher, right? I've been teaching many years. I want to make sure you get this concept of the forest development. And this is yet another artist's way to portray that. Here's the disturbance. They're showing fire here, stand initiation, regeneration, the stem exclusion phase, right? The shady dark green desert, canopy transition, where we get more species, including shade-loving species. And then this diagram is more accurate because in the old growth phase, they show a gap. And that gap is very important because that gap lets in more sunlight. So in a true old growth forest, you can have even sun-living things living there because there are these gaps. Now, the gap could be as small as an old tree that fell over and left a gap of light in there, or the gaps could be very large. I'll show examples of that next, but first note that only 1% of the old growth phase forest left is in the eastern US. So our eastern forests, it may take them, I think, about 150 years of being left alone. You're starting to get into this old growth phase. So very few of our forests have been left alone that long. They've been cut and then they've been cut again. So what happens is they get to this stem exclusion phase and then they're cut down, start over again. They get to the stem exclusion phase and they're cut again. So the gaps I'm talking about in the old growth forest can also be thought of as disturbances. And these are not necessarily a bad thing. This is natural in a forest. This is what happens. There are going to be windstorms. There are going to be derechos. There's going to be tornadoes. There are going to be fire. But note that these are patchy through the landscape. The wind won't take down everything for 100 miles. It'll hit hard in some places and not in other. And it's the same way with fire when it moves through the landscape. Some parts will be hit harder than others. And then insects are another disturbance factor, such as the emerald ash borer that's destroying a lot of our ash trees now, creating gaps in that forest. And the wood that's left behind is actually an important ecological component. So if you go in there and say, oh, these trees got blown over or they burned or their insects got them, and remove all that wood, it may make sense economically, commercially, or visually if it's in your yard, but ecologically, it would be better to leave that carbon in the landscape, because not only are you going to keep that carbon there and it'll return to that forest that grows back up, but it's also places of habitat for a lot of species. So this quote here, in the absence of natural forest disturbance factors, habitat managers must replicate those factors in order to conserve species that depend on early succession habitat. Okay, I do not agree with this statement. I have this here because we're going to be talking about humans trying to create early succession habitat. And one of the things I don't agree with this statement, it says in the absence of natural forest disturbance, we must replicate that. Guess what? There's no absence of natural forest disturbance. Try as you might, you cannot stop natural forest disturbance. Like I said, it's not necessarily bad. There's going to be windstorms, there's going to be insects, there's going to be fire, things are going to happen. So we're always going to have those gaps, large or small, that early successional species can live in. But in the past, in the East, that was about 1 to 2% of our landscape. Most of the landscape in the East was forested, with forests that didn't have big disturbances. And that is how we were able to get forests that look like this in North Carolina and probably Virginia and Maryland. We had some amazing forests with giant old trees because those spots were fortunate. They got lucky. Yes, there were natural disturbances, plenty of them, but it didn't take out the majority of the forest. It's estimated that at least half of the forest was this old growth undisturbed. And we know the history there. Then when humans came in, that's another disturbance, and that was a massive disturbance, larger than any fire or insect or windstorm ever. We've disturbed plenty of forest land. So here's our original US forest coverage. Again, some of this would have been disturbed, some of it was cleared by native peoples for cropland or for their communities, but about 50% of it would have been this old growth phase that I showed you in the development. So there would have been some gaps, but also a lot of old trees. And then here comes the human disturbance, 1850, 1920, and onward to the point where we just have 1% left of that old growth phase in the East and 5% in the West. Not only have we changed the percentage of the forest that's in that old growth phase, but we have reduced the forest cover on the planet from 46% to 31%. So we've changed the structure and we've changed the amount. Looking at Virginia, so when the early European settlers arrived, it would have been 80 to 90% forested. The areas that were not forested were mostly the wetland areas where beavers, I forgot to mention them, they're a huge disturbance to the forest, but again, not necessarily negative. So they'll chomp the trees, they'll cause floods that will kill some of the trees, but this creates diversity in habitat that allows a diversity of species to live. But then by the 1800s, with the Europeans chopping down the trees, exporting them, using them for everything, that number went down to 60 to 40%. By 1930, Virginia had the lowest forest cover ever. The forest cover began increasing, recovering, and till now it's 62% forest cover, right? So the forest cover is much lower than it used to be. 62% is not bad, but it's not 80 to 90%. And that 62% forest cover is a much younger forest. A lot of it is in that stem exclusion phase. And the forest cover is declining every year due to development. Current lost 18,000 acres per year. Looks something like this. You know, the green would be forested, the pink non-forest, and the majority of that forest, not old growth forest. Now we get to the bird section, finally talking about birds. Now I've set the stage for forest development, and this is yet another graphic showing forest development. This one again, ending at 100 years old, which is, you know, not even middle age for a forest. But here we can see that different types of birds, different bird species, like different ages of forest. And that is natural we can pick any animal, any insect, and some are going to like it hot, some are going to like it dry, some are going to like it cold, some are going to like it wet. All animals have different habitat requirements, including the birds. And what the forests do for the birds, of course, so many things, right? One of the things is habitat for reproduction. So many birds, migratory birds, come here just to reproduce and then to go back to their homeland. The trees with hollows in them, especially the older trees that have had some damage to them, are used by the cavity nesters that cannot make their own nests. There's a number of birds that can't peck holes in the tree like the woodpeckers, and they not born knowing how to weave nests, so they have to find cavities that are already there or bark flaps. So the older forests give them more of that. Then the tanagers here with a nest, the forest give places to hide those nests from the predators and shade and protection from the rain. And of course, the berries from the diverse shrubs and small trees that would be growing in the later stages of forest development. And the insects in a forest. Here's the brown creeper, which is known as a old growth forest loving bird. And they creep along the bark like it sounds. And what they're looking for is insects to feed themselves and to feed their young. So if you have a bunch of skinny little trees, there's not a lot of surface area there to find insects. But if you have the big old trees, there's more chance of finding insects on that. So just the structure of those large trees can help the insect eating birds. And as you know, most of the nestlings are fed insects because they're the highest in fat and they're the highest in protein. So habitat for the insects. And what do the insects eat? They eat the things that they're finding in the forest. Then there are the birds that aren't nesting in cavities. They're not building nests. They're nesting on the forest floor. So they need these trees with the big roots that they can tuck their little nests in there. And they need the leaves and the twigs that fall from the trees to camouflage those nests and to make their nests out of. This beech tree here was in a forest that is slated to be clear cut. It's heartbreaking. And I was in this forest, walking through this forest, trying to decide what I could do. And I saw a little tiny thing flit out of this spot. And I went and looked very closely. And there was a nest of ovenbird. And there were 4 little eggs in there. And imagine if this forest gets cut and we're still trying to save it. I mean, that equipment is going to come in there. The machines are going to chop that tree down. That nest is going to be crushed. What's going to happen to the population of that ovenbird in that area? It's going to be reduced. And guess what this beech tree would be used for? They're not even that valuable for wood. It would be used for a mat to support cranes to do construction work, so that the construction cranes wouldn't push down through the dirt. I mean, that's what we're doing with our bird habitat. Not right. Okay, take a deep breath, everyone, because this is the really difficult part of this talk. When we talk about what's happening to planet Earth, we have to be very honest. We have to look with open eyes, and what is happening is heartbreaking. We are killing the planet. I know a lot of you have seen David Attenborough's new film, and we should be talking about this all the time. We should talk about a lot more than we are. So we're killing the planet. We're losing biodiversity. We're losing species. Just about anything you look at, the graphs look like this. Many of you, I know, besides birds, you're interested in butterflies, the Lepidoptera, and they are declining as well. A few years ago, there was papers called the insect apocalypse, right? Insect populations are declining. You might say, why does that matter? Well, we just talked about the birds that are feeding on the insects. So the insects decline, the birds are going to decline. Why are they declining? So many reasons. Insecticides is one of them. Why should we be using insecticides? We spray insecticides from airplanes over the earth. Come on. Birds too. Yeah. Bird populations are declining. And we know this. We've known it for a while. I got my master's in the late 80s. I remember going to a talk about the decline in bird populations. Well, it's only increased since then. And this is the same sort of data. This is I think the most disturbing graph in my talk. We'll bring it up a little bit later after this, but we have the data, right? This is what's happening to our birds. We're losing billions of individual birds. And you can take this one line and you can break it out into different habitat preferences. As I was mentioning earlier, different birds like different habitats. So the grassland birds are really in trouble. And a lot of that is just we've taken the grasslands and we put GMO crops there and we spray insecticides and herbicides, and those birds, not only do they not have habitat, but then they don't have anything to eat. And you can see that in almost every habitat except the wetlands, the bird populations are declining. So you may wonder, so why are the wetland birds doing okay? And what I've heard is that our regulations to protect wetlands are getting much better than they used to be. But it could also be, I think, sea level rise, right? We have a lot more wetlands than we used to. And rainfall patterns have changed, especially in the east. So places that weren't wet 20 years ago are wet now. So there's more habitat for some of those wetland birds. But the other birds are not doing well. And same sort of data, but instead of looking at what type of habitat and how they're doing, this one looks at types of birds, such as sparrows and warblers and blackbirds. It's interesting, even the non-native birds are declining. That could be, you might think that's a good thing, but they are. Why? Again, all the same reasons that our native birds are declining too. And then increases in turkeys and grouse, raptors, gnatcatchers, ducks and geese and vireos. So different things like different habitats, some doing great, some not so great. Let's talk about a few specific birds. I'm going to talk about maybe 6 or 7 specific birds. So here is the wonderful, lovely wood thrush with its beautiful, beautiful song. And here we are in the heart of the wood thrush range. And you can see that the wood thrush, this is 1970, 80, 90, 2000 to 2010. We are losing our wood thrush. Are we going to lose it completely? I don't know. I don't see it turning around. The wood thrush needs large areas of unbroken forest with closed tree canopies to breed successfully. Forest fragmentation leaves nests vulnerable to predation by brown-headed cowbird. So anytime you compromise a forest by saying, okay, we have these, whatever, 200 acres, and we're only going to cut 50 acres, and we're going to save the rest. Even that fragmentation can affect these bird species. Cerulean warbler, same thing, much smaller breeding range. They like high altitude, and a lot of their habitat is being destroyed in the mountaintop removal. And look at their population trend. They love the canopy of the old growth forests. Blackburnian warbler, same thing. Many of these birds need large tracts of unfragmented forest. There's the list you can run down here. So anytime we punch a hole in these forests, we're disturbing these birds. And not only just protection from the brown-headed cowbirds, some of them are just shy and secretive. So if you have a lot of noise and a population near them, those birds will avoid those places. If you look at this list, you won't see a lot of these in the dense housing development areas. These are birds of the forest. So this forest fragmentation is a major cause of population decline. Again, the wood thrush population declining, and here is brown-headed cowbird increasing with the increased fragmentation. And I'm sure you already know that the cowbirds parasitize the nest by taking out the songbird eggs and putting their own egg in the nest instead, and their populations are increasing. It's a successful strategy for them. So now that you know about forest development, you know what's happening to our birds, I want to talk about something called the Young Forest Initiative. And this is something that can go by a number of terms. So AKA wildlife habitat improvement, increase young forest cover, regenerate diverse vegetation, right? All this sounds pretty good if you don't see through it like I do. I'm going to try to get you to understand what's going on here. So you'll read these prescriptions. The treatment will perpetuate shrubs, sedges, grasses that have co-evolved with the ephemeral nature of natural disturbances, but are otherwise relatively uncommon when canopy conditions remain closed. I'm going to talk about that. Early successional habitat is currently underrepresented, these folks say. What they're trying to say here in so many words, and I say they because a lot of this is forest managers, and a lot of them are paid for with our tax dollars. They'll work for the state or they'll work for the county, and they'll work for the federal government. And they're saying here that they want to cut out a piece of the forest to make it early successional habitat. And they're saying that they're doing this because we can't depend on natural disturbances to create these early successional habitats, that we want to do it ourselves. But the problem is that they want to do that to the places where the forests are recovering in age. So they don't want to do that to the 25-year-old forest. They want to do that to the 95-year-old forest that's trying to recover and approach old age again, right? We have so little old age forests in the landscape. So why are they wanting to do it to the older forests instead of the younger forest? Or why aren't they trying to create new early successional forest, right? Leave a little piece of a cornfield and let that grow back to forest. And you'll have this early successional habitat they're trying to create. When I see through this, what I see is they're taking the 95-year-old trees because they're going to get money for them, value. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that, but they don't couch it in those terms. They couch it like we're doing this as a good thing to increase young forest cover and to get diverse vegetation. But you also know that they're fragmenting the forest by doing this, right? So we have natural fragmentation that really can't be helped, but fragmentation on purpose is a problem, I believe. So one of the birds that they select to help with this initiative is golden-winged warblers, because they are an early successional loving bird. And golden warbler, winged warbler numbers are declining, right? Almost all bird numbers are declining. We saw that. So why did they pick just this one, this bird, instead of picking a bird that needs old forest? Well, I think it's because they want to be able to cut the forest and have it sound like that they're doing a good thing. So let's really look at this golden-winged warbler thing. In the stripes here, we have the historic range of the golden-winged warbler. So it's really a little bit north of where we are here. And the range of the golden-winged warbler has been moving northward. Maybe that's climate change. Maybe that will be addressed in this other talk you're having, I don't know. And the dark area is where the range has contracted. So it's shrinking to the south and it's growing to the north. To me, that kind of looks like things aren't so bad with the bird, but it may be disappearing from certain areas because its range is changing, right? All kinds of, with nature, there's always going to be population cycles and there will be range changes. But yet, the Fish and Wildlife Service decides that there needs to be a $10 million forest restoration project to benefit the imperiled golden-winged warbler. And that $10 million is going to be used to create breeding habitat for 1,180 pairs. That seems like a lot of money to me for not that many birds. And how are they going to, it sounds really good, right? A forest restoration project to benefit an imperiled bird. But how are they going to benefit that bird? This forest restoration is actually forest destruction. They're going to benefit it by cutting down forests. And that's what they describe here. Prescribed management may include timber improvement and shrubland restoration. That's timber speak for clear-cut logging. And there's a complication to this also because there's another bird called the blue-winged warbler, which is actually more of the southern species. And the blue-winged warbler has, as those two habitats have overlapped, the blue-winged warblers have been mating with the golden-winged warblers. And so we have a lot of hybrid species. That's shown in green here, right? The yellow is the golden-winged warbler, range expanding north. The blue is a blue-winged warbler, and the green are hybrids. So it could be that the golden-winged warblers are disappearing because they're slowly turning into blue-winged warbler hybrids. So it's complicated. It's not so easy. Okay. I'm not making this up. This is actually happening. This is a cut in New Jersey for the golden-winged warbler, Young Forest Initiative. And this is on a wildlife management area. And this was a large, unfragmented forest of about 90 years old, average. And almost all of those trees taken out were oak trees. So 80, 90, 100-year-old oak trees taken out in the name of the golden-winged warbler. That's not really doing so well down here anyway. You know, the earliest birders that came through here and documented the birds didn't even mention seeing them. They got more plentiful as humans cleared out the forest, but now some of those forests are growing back. The birds are disappearing again. But we use them as an excuse to take out these old oak trees. And I know that most of you are familiar with Doug Tallamy's work, and he has a new book that just came out about oak trees. And he mentions that oaks support more life forms than any other North American tree, with food, protection, countless organisms, right? So in the name of just this one bird, we're taking out all of this habitat and all of this food source. And I say we because it's our tax dollars, right? We voted for the people that put this in, and millions of dollars are going to this. And again, my suspicion is they want to cut some oak trees, and this sounds like a good excuse to do it. In this same wildlife management area, there is this giant power line clearing that goes on for a couple miles. If we really need young forest habitat, why don't we let some forest grow up under this power line and cut it back every 15 years? So it won't grow up into the power lines, but there you'll have early successional habitat. Or what about some of the lawns that are surrounding our schools and our housing developments, you name it? We can let some of that grow back into early successional habitat if that's so important for these species. But no, right? They're not even considering that. They're going after the old trees to cut them down. Okay, there's two other birds that are used as an excuse to cut forests with this Young Forest Initiative. One of them is the ruffed grouse. And yes, there is no doubt that the ruffed grouse is declining. So these numbers are from 2013 to 2020. Ruffed grouse has declined. Interestingly, the one place where it's increased is the state of New York. And the state of New York is one of the best at protecting their old forests. So there's 150,000 acres of old growth forest firmly protected in the Adirondacks. Maybe that's one reason the ruffed grouse is doing better there, but they are seen in open habitat. So they're thought of as a early successional habitat bird. So a lot of forests are cut for ruffed grouse habitat, which makes no sense to me because we hunt them, we shoot them, we kill them. If we really cared about these birds, the ruffed grouse, we would not allow hunting of them. In Virginia, they can be hunted west of I-95. 87 birds per hunter are legal every year. The third bird, the last one I'm going to talk about with this Young Forest Initiative, is the woodcock. Numbers are declining, just like with all of our birds, just about. The red bars are in the 1970s, the population, and the gray, white striped bars are in the 2000s. So populations of woodcock have declined. But again, they're legal to be hunted. In Maryland, you can take 3 birds per day. You can have 9 dead woodcock birds on your person. I've never even seen that many birds, woodcock at once. Each person can kill 108 woodcock per year. But the American Woodcock Conservation Plan says 20 million acres need to be cut for the woodcock. It's just crazy, just crazy. And in these plans also, it'll say things like most woodland breeding bird species have increasing population trends. This is just not true. It's like, you know, we're like Alice in Wonderland or something. It's like they can say anything they want in these plans and nobody questions them because it sounds so official. And so much money is raised for these programs, for these few birds that the hunters like. It's something I'm still trying to understand. I don't know if they're just very politically astute, the hunting groups that want to increase these populations of birds, or whether it's the forestry community wants to have a reason to cut. I'm still trying to understand it. But in the meantime, I'm sharing this with you because I don't want you to be sucked into it too. I don't want you to think it's a good thing. Little more about woodcocks, right? Here's the range in the 1970s. Here's the range in the 2000s. So yes, they're disappearing, but it looks to me again like the range is moving northward. I couldn't find any data into Canada. It doesn't look like it's doing better in one state or another because of more early successional habitat. It doesn't relate to me. In fact, some of the highest populations are in the old forests up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So saying that we need to cut the forest for the woodcock, data doesn't all line up. But yet they'll say that that's the reason for it, the loss of early successional habitat. Now, just a little bit about not Young Forest Initiative for birds, but just the attitude about how our public lands are being managed. So it's,
yeah, I just put it on the phone on my chair arm, but I want to make sure you can hear it. Okay.
Lynn, can you mute? Okay.
I don't see you, but I see it. I hear it.
Kyle, can you mute Lynn? Okay.
Sorry.
So this is a quote from Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, right? Timber harvesting is important for managing healthy forests, whatever that means. Trees do not live forever, and they generally grow slower as they get older. Well, that's not true. We know that trees can put on, as they get older, more wood, more carbon than when they were younger. And then as trees die, they can become fuel for catastrophic wildfires. It's the younger populations, that second growth forest, that burns hotter and faster than the old forests. So this is just not true. And when the trees grow slower, they become more susceptible to insect attack and disease. That is not true. You know, when you look at the science, right? I'm a scientist. Actually, the slower a tree grows, the more resistant it's going to be to insects and a lot of the fungal diseases, because the wood is a lot harder. It's when you have trees that are springing up and growing really fast with the softer wood, those are the trees that are more susceptible to insect attack and disease. But why is this untruth? Therefore, it is often necessary and desirable to harvest timber, right? So they're setting this false stage so that, oh, they're doing a good job. They have to harvest this timber to save you. And one more soapbox example like this, right? This is this year. I'm standing in a Maryland forest, state forest. They put out the plan, what they're going to cut this year. I go to see it. It's ridiculous. You know, it's the last 120 acre piece in a sea of pine plantation. And literally in the newspaper article that had some quotes from me, here's the quote from our Maryland State Forest Manager, Chesapeake. We manage the forest and we cut timber for the health of the forest. Sound familiar? If you did not cut it, it would grow, it would die, it would fall down, it would create potential fuel for a wildfire. We're never going to have old growth forest again if this is who is managing our public lands. And we call this the chainsaw prescription. And it's just a scam to promote logging. Why do they want to promote logging? You know, the real truth. Well, it's what they've been taught. These folks have gone to forestry school. They're taught you don't let trees get old and fall down and die because that's a waste. You want to cut them when they're in their prime. Also, they look at these trees as money. And so they feel like it's a waste not to cut them. And it's okay to grow trees for money, but not all of our public forests should be looked at that way. We should be letting some recover, and we should be letting some be habitat for the many birds that need the old trees and the many animals. So that's the negative stuff. And now we get to what can we do? What can we do about it? Because I know that I'm not alone in wanting to let some of these forests recover and be habitat for the animals and be places for humans to enjoy. So my challenge or my project that I decided to do, we all have our passion project and how can we make a difference? And I thought if we can just set aside one forest in each county that's not going to be cut again, right? So we're not, as much as I would love all of our Maryland state forests and all of our Virginia state forests, and maybe the Virginia National Forest too, to become carbon and biodiversity banks, wouldn't that be nice? That might not happen right away, but at least we can find one forest that's protected and open to the public so we can develop a relationship to those places. And that's the Old Growth Forest Network that was started in 2012. And we now have 118 forests in the network in 24 different states. And this is our webpage. I invite you to visit it, oldgrowthforest.net. You can see where all of those forests are. We give exact directions to them. They're all open. None of them will ever be logged for any reason. And you can also sign up to get on our email list. So if I come to Northern Neck again, which I plan to do, and have another forest dedication, you'll get an invitation to that. And I also will point out our donate button here, Facebook and donate, because we are entirely supported by individuals who believe in this work and support it, and small family foundations. We get no government money whatsoever, no big grants yet, although that would be nice. But we're slowly growing. At first I was the only employee, and now we have a small handful. So our work is speeding up. It's a beautiful thing to see. And it feels like it's turning the tide against some of that negativity and that loss of biodiversity and the attitudes of some of the forest managers. So it's a huge job. I cannot do it alone, right? It's a national job. So how we accomplish this is by recruiting county coordinators. So one forest in each county, right? We need a person in that county to help us find the best forest for the network. And best is usually oldest or biggest or give you the wow factor. You know, I think of kids, you know, I want kids to fall in love with these places. So we're looking for forests open to the public, relatively accessible, protected from logging, as old as possible. And the most difficult one of those four is protected from logging. So many forests, you would be amazed that you think are protected, are not really protected from logging. And here we are at Voorhees at one of our wonderful dedications. And there's Betsy, one of our county coordinators. And there's Jeff, one of our county coordinators, and the forest managers. So we do all this work. We find the forest, we contact the forest managers, we celebrate with a dedication and lead a tour through the forest. It was a little bit different this year, as you might imagine. Some of the forest dedications were virtual, but I did manage to get over to the Northern Neck and have a dedication. So I'd like to thank Betsy Washington for being the Lancaster County coordinator, and Jeff Wright, he's our star. He got a couple forests in the network this year, and he's still working on more. So here we are in Virginia with its 95 counties. And in yellow, we have the counties that already have, oh no, excuse me, in blue are the ones where we already have county coordinators. And in yellow, those counties, we still need someone. So if you spend any time in those counties and would like to volunteer, you can go onto the website and then we will send you information about how to be a county coordinator. And then you can decide if you really want to be it or not. But it's fun, right, Jeff? And here we are at Hickory Hollow, yay, which is also in the Old Growth Forest Network. There we are at our dedication. We had a fabulous hike. Betsy introduced us to all the wildflowers there, saw amazing mushrooms in that place. And I want to thank Northern Neck Audubon for doing the work to preserve that forest so it can be there for all generations. So thank you for that. And hopefully, maybe some of the people listening tonight are in this photo too. So it was a great day. Thank you. In green are the Virginia counties that are already in the Old Growth Forest Network. Shown in yellow are the ones where we have nominations. So you can also nominate a forest anywhere that you want. So we kind of put together the nominations with the county coordinator before we decide on a forest for the network. And this is the list so far from Virginia, and you can just go on our website to see exactly where they are and exactly how to get there. So, and we're doing this all over the country, so we're very busy. So wrapping up, here's the message, right? We need to retain forests, especially unmanaged forests, these older forests, and build a community of people who care about them. Because if we just sit back, these public forest managers are just going to be hacking away at our forests. They're going to be selling them for timber or managing them for game species. We need to have a voice. We need to stick together. I'd like to say that we're not just a network of forests, we're a network of people who care about forests. So by sticking together, we also, the Old Growth Forest Network, we support other people's causes too, right? So if we stick together, if you're working on something, we can spread the word, spread the message, and add our weight to your push. We partner and collaborate with many groups to save these old forests. And we speak out for forests that are protected in name only, like these state forest and wildlife management areas, but not truly protected. And not to forget that 87% of the forests in Virginia are privately owned. So we need to reach those private forest owners too and educate them. So we work on that. So if you own some forest land that you've committed to letting get older, we'd love to hear about that. And you can join our private forest network for free. And you're not expected to open your forest to the public. It's just a commitment that you've made to allow some forests to get older during your watch. And that's my message for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for being there and for listening. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Joan. That was really fabulous. I have to say we do have a couple of questions. I have to say myself, I grew up in the redwoods of California, and I spent all my summers of my childhood in the redwoods in a cabin with no electricity and old growth around me, and it was pretty fantastic. It's long since gone, I'm sorry to say, but it really rings a bell to me, old growth forest. But we do have a couple questions. So one of them is fire being overused? Is fire being overused as a management tool to create forest disturbance?
That's a very complex question. It's a very good question. I'm still learning about that myself. You know, I go to the science and I feel like the science hasn't really been done that we need to do to understand what we're doing with these prescribed fires. I think there's a lot of money out there to burn, and a lot of these forest managers like to burn, and some forests actually need it, like the longleaf pine ecosystem. I would agree. If we want to keep longleaf pines, what's left, right? We've cut almost all of them down, but if we want to try to protect the few longleaf pine forests that are left, that is an ecosystem that needs fire to stay in longleaf pine. But when I look at a lot of the forests near where I live in Maryland, and they're mixed, right? They're beech and they're maple and they're oak and they're hickory and they're black gum and they're sweet gum. I think often that burning is done because the forest managers don't like the beech and they don't like the maple, and these trees are more susceptible to the fire. They want the oak and they want the hickory. So I'm suspecting that a lot of the prescribed burning is to push it toward oak and hickory. And the reason that they like the oak and hickory is because the timber is worth more. So I think a lot of the prescribed burning has almost a secret agenda of, and then eventually we're going to harvest this. So that said, there are times when you will burn and find a certain wildflower that will come back that wasn't there before. But then what else are you harming? I know with snails, they all explode. So who's looking at the snail population? Who's speaking for them? So I would say it's complex. I don't really have a complete answer, but I think we definitely need more science about that before we increase the burning.
Good, thank you. We have a second question too, and it is, to be in an old growth network, how many acres of forest are needed?
We have no minimum size for our network forest, but of course we're looking around that county, and if there's a very small forest compared to a very large old forest, we'll pick the larger forest, because the more acres you have, the more biodiversity you're going to have. There's a linear relationship between biodiversity and the size of the forest. But that said, in one of the counties here on the shore, Queen Anne's County, there's a perfect forest for the old growth forest network. It's old growth, it has a parking lot, it has a trail, beautiful big old trees, but it's only 14 acres. And we would put that in the network gladly. if it were protected. But it's managed by Maryland State Parks, and they are not protected from logging. So yeah, that's the smallest one I've been looking at so far.
Do you know if the Virginia parks are protected from logging? Do you know, Jeff? Jeff?
We can't hear you. Mute.
Yeah, the issue that comes up with Caledon, it's one that has perfect segments for the old growth forest, but Virginia won't commit to it, and several other major forests, they won't commit even to giving a segment of Caledon and designate for the old growth forest. So it's a tremendous effort and many roadblocks in the way, but it's just that they want to keep open the option to cut it down.
Yes, there's only 8 states that protect their state parks from logging, and I would love to see more of a push. I think the general population would, of course, support protecting the state parks from logging. But how do we get that bill introduced? You know,
like Westmoreland State Park just has some phenomenal sections of forest that are just very ripe to be protected. I know that that's a bad assemblage of words there in that sentence, but there's things out there that really should be protected, and the public loves to go through them on those trails, and why not?
Right. And the answer they'll give is, well, we're not cutting it. So that's great. If you're not cutting it, then why don't we protect it now? Because we don't know what's going to happen in 50 years from now. You know, we could get another governor and we could run out of money, and they could decide that that's where they're going to get the money from. So this is the time to protect it when we're not getting any income from it. It's not going to cost anybody anything to protect it.
Thank you. Before I thank Joan and go on, I'll ask if there's any other questions, and you can put them in the chat box if you want. I do want to mention that Joan has written a number of books about old growth forests, and of course you can find them easily on the internet, either searching under Joan or certainly on Amazon. And I particularly like Nature's Temples. That, I think, is a phenomenal good book for anyone interested in natural history. And if you can only read one book before you pass on, this would be the one to read.
Aw, Kevin, thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, that book is out of print right now, so hang on to yours because they are going for a very dear price, whatever's left. And good news is that I will be doing an expanded and revised version of that through Princeton University Press, and it'll be in paperback, so it'll get cheaper again, but it'll be at least 1.5 years before that comes out. So
awesome. Well, if anybody need be, they can borrow a copy, right?
Yes, and the libraries hopefully have them.
Good. Anybody else? We do maybe have one other comment. Someone asked, do you have any new books coming out other than that one?
Oh, yes.
Vision?
So my books really quickly. My first one is Teaching the Trees, and that's the one I usually recommend people start with. That's very natural history stories, a lot of heart and poetry. And then Among the Ancients are my travels through the old growth forests in the East. That's fun, kind of a travel book. Nature's Temples was next. Then the coffee table book with Virginia photographer Robert Llewellyn is called The Living Forest. And that's huge. And my next one will come out this summer, and it's a very small one called Treepedia. And it's kind of fun facts about trees and tree people.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I don't think we have any more questions.
Okay.
So I want to thank you, Joan. That was wonderful.
Thanks, everyone. I enjoyed it. Thank you for the opportunity. This is the first time I gave a talk just like this where I rant about the Young Forest Initiative. So,
well, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Take care. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Take care.
See you in the morning.
You bet.